Dicken, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with us. We are both excited to be speaking with you. And I know that I always feel impacted when you share and see new things. And so on a very personal level, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I really appreciate how you speak to the spiritual nature of who we are and how that fits with our human psychology and how the teachings of Sydney Banks have impacted you in your life. And it's just, I love how you put it all together. So looking forward to it.
Well, thanks.
There goes a helicopter. Hopefully,
yeah, right on time.
Right on time.
Of course, we're recording.
Perfect timing. Pretty soon I'll have my dog barking, and the neighbor next door will use the leaf blower, and we'll be good to go.
That's right.
None of our feathers will be ruffled.
Yeah, thankfully, the leaf blowers seem to do Mondays in our neighborhood. Well, actually, it is Monday. Oh my goodness, I've completely lost touch with what day of the week it is.
We just did an intensive this weekend, so Angus what you probably think is Friday.
Well, not only did we do an intensive, but it was in another part of the world. We're in different time zones, so we had to do most of it at night.
Oh, that's right, New Zealand, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the next day problem.
Yeah, I don't know where I am in terms of what time of day or the time of.
I don't know where you are either. That's
Anyway,
the big question. Maybe we should talk about that for the next hour.
Let me just get present for a moment. Well, to get back on track.
We won't stay on track. That's boring.
Well, I just want to say how much I love you, Dicken, and how much I feel it's such a blessing always to talk to you. And I think that one of the things that I've always loved about you and why you're one of my absolute favorite teachers is I just think you just have such a big open heart. And I don't know if this is the right way to look at it. It's just like there's just no ego with you. I just you're so approachable. I feel like you're someone that anybody could just walk up to and just have a conversation. And you teach this understanding in such a beautiful way.
I was just listening to a little clip of a talk from the last live London conference where I talked about ordinary yet sacred life. And I think that's one of the main things I've learned is all the ego creates such a story and pretense and facade that it's great to be able to fall out of that and just be an ordinary schmuck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's such a relief.
Yeah.
And it's so much more enjoyable you lighten up and get a kick out of life.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's part of your X factor. I think because you kind of got a handle on that and understand and see that is that it gives everybody else around you permission to kind of probably drop their ego. Whether they're even conscious of that or not, I think it kind of falls away.
Well, that certainly happened around Sid. He was the most down-to-earth, ordinary person I had met, and around him, if you stayed in your facade pretense, it became so evident to you in his presence and painful. And so either people felt the pain of their ego or they felt freed from ego in his presence. So.
Yeah.
You're the ego killer.
The ego zapper.
That's right.
Well, as we said, it's lovely spending time with you. And so you mentioned Sid. I think that would be a great place to start in terms of looking at how you have been impacted by the teachings of Sydney Banks and how that's helped you personally and professionally and impacted you in profound ways. One of the reasons that we're doing these guest speaker interviews is to show how the understanding that Angus and I work from, how universal it is and how other people share from it. And there's so many there's not one way to do it, but yet there's a universal understanding behind it that's so powerful.
Well, I was a psychologist for 10 years before meeting Sid, and don't kid yourself, people become psychologists so they can try and get their own act together. And plus I was a parent of a 13-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. And I love being a parent, but I sure at times sounded like I was channeling my father when he was upset.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like that. And so I was always wanting to become a better dad and better husband. And I was certainly, as you guys experienced too, was fully embracing the self-improvement model,
Mm-hmm.
which meant I didn't have well-being. I needed to work really hard to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife used to say to me before I came to Sid was, you work harder on yourself than anybody you know, anybody I know. And I thought she was giving me a compliment. You know, I was only sleeping 4 hours a day because I had so much work on myself to do. You know, meditating 4 hours a day, dream work, affirmation work, cognitive restructuring, journals, books to read. And later, when I started having insight into the principles, I came back to my wife on hand and knee, said, "Oh, great wise one, forgive me. I was so ignorant that I thought you had to become more like me." When in truth, you're walking around one of the most content, loving, compassionate people. I should have been discovering what your secret was all these years and thrown away all my efforting. But in the motto I was living from, that made sense. So when I first met Sid, to answer your question, that was quite a preamble. But when I first met Sid, I cried because of his absolute certainty that everybody, no exception, already had perfect well-being. And that insight into the principles would very simply bring you back to your natural state. As the rewilding would happen through insight, you would come back to this natural state of pure presence, pure being. And I had been a meditator, and after 2 hours of working on my breath or mantra or whatever exercise technique I was using, I would experience what it was like to fall into presence, just have little glimpses. But I assumed that could only be reached through years of effort. And here's Sid Banks saying, no, you're a thought away from your well-being at all times. You just get caught up in the trying, striving, efforting, doing, thinking, and that when any human being falls out of that, they drop into, metaphorically, drop into their well-being. They fall into the love that we are. And while he was talking, I just stopped my self-improvement, searching, efforting mentality. And oh my God, it was like totally present, wide awake. My senses were singing. And this feeling of just love and connection was there. And here I thought I didn't have that. I had to develop it. And I immediately began to intuit everybody is what they're looking for. before I heard anything about thought or the principles, or in his presence, as we were talking about sort of the power of presence, it just relaxed. I got to do what Sid calls just be yourself, but big S, right? Not the story, not the ideas about yourself, not your beliefs, not your concepts. That's a fabrication. He called it an illusion. It's just purely made up. And so that very first experience of what Sid was talking about, and the recognition of this is true, allowed me to set aside 20 years of psychology training, set it aside and go, that's the old psychology. This is paving the way for a brand new foundation. So when he talked principles, I looked it up in the dictionary, and principles, most people in the world use, I live my life by these principles, which just means these good ideas that I've learned. And he used the word in the dictionary. There's also, it means that which is most foundational. And he would say, what can be more foundational than infinity, than the universe? You are connected to that energy. There is no separation. There's really one principle. There's an infinite field of formless energy, and it dances into form in a way that's creative, the principle of thought, in the way that's aware, the principle of consciousness, in a way that this field, infinite field, is wise because it knows how to create and operate and guide what's created. So 3 fundamental characteristics of our true self, and we already have that connection and alignment with the universe itself, our true nature. So that was just in the first talk or meeting. And he lived from that healing space. And he said, you are that.
Yeah.
And I've heard other people say that, but it struck me. I experientially had what he says, just get a teeny glimpse, it'll change your life. Well, that teeny glimpse, and it was a teeny glimpse, changed my life right then and there. Okay. I've got what I'm looking for.
Wow. I'm curious. And so was it, how immediate was that, in a way where, my goodness, I mean, to be a professional psychologist and to have all that experience and all that education under your belt, it's like your ego probably wants to really hang on to that. Did it take a while for it to sort of fall away? Were you kind of finding yourself in conflict about that?
The insight was instant. The restructuring of my understanding and my way of looking at life, then I had to adjust to having a whole new way of looking at psychology and looking at life and looking at my wife and my kids. But the insight brought about an irreversible shift in my understanding that would get lost when I got thinking about it. But every time, not even every time, occasionally I would just wake back up and fall back into what I then started to realize was our true self. All the years of meditation were helpful, but it still was in the paradigm of self-improvement. And this was a whole different ballgame from the get-go. It said he didn't have a teacher, he didn't have a practice, he didn't work hard. He had insightful realizations, two big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so you knew when he said it's not a function of practice, but of insight, he was someone worth listening to. Because he couldn't say, well, I had 50 years of meditation practice and then I had this realization. And it would be hard to convince people that practice didn't attribute to that.
Mm-hmm.
But for a ninth grade educated welder to say, yeah, no, my life was transformed in an instant, which didn't mean I immediately had no ego forever and ever thereafter, but I deeply realized the truth of our true nature, and that was irreversible, and I couldn't lose that knowing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a learning process to sort of where my human side had to catch up with the realization of my being side.
Yeah. You were heavily trending towards well-being from that point on.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. You know, George Pransky likes to say, once you're on a learning curve, you can't stop it from happening. And either it happens to you really quickly or slowly, it doesn't matter, you're on it. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
I'm on the learning curve of a new paradigm. Truth.
And that, I think, is so key, the distinction between the paradigm of self-help versus the paradigm of innate well-being.
Yeah, it really is.
And that in self-help, we have the thing, because I know that I lived with that thinking for a long time too and was pretty exhausted by it, that I needed to improve myself and improve my psychology in order for me to be able to have more peace of mind and more experiences of well-being. And so could you speak a little bit more to what the other paradigm of innate well-being is and how that's different?
Basically, psychology focused on the past. All psychology, because they would focus on, tell me what happened to you. That's past. Tell me what you were feeling yesterday when this happened, or 10 years ago, or 60 years ago. What were you feeling? What were you thinking? What were you doing? What was your behavior? And it's focused on already created thinking content, even if it's unconscious thinking content, like Freud did, unconscious thinking content. Depth psychology was the exploration of what he called depth psychology, which isn't really, is the exploration of stored memory. So content, past, stored, feeling, all the so Freudian psychology, the cognitive psychology focuses on what you were thinking. Existential humanistic focused on what you were feeling. Behaviorist focused on what you were. But what they all had in common is they were unknowingly just going over, it's a memory-based psychology focused on the past. And Sid said, forget content. Become aware of the fact that right now, beneath or behind or beyond your content, right now in this moment, is everything you're looking for. It's creative. It's the source of infinite, new and fresh, of possibilities. It's the source of awareness and higher levels of consciousness. It's the source of new thoughts and ideas and of deeper feelings of well-being, but they can only be found beyond time, which means beyond concepts, in the now. And so all of his teaching was pointing in that direction. So on a practical level, in my first training, I started seeing my wife and kids differently, and then my clients also, as having perfect well-being. They just get caught up in their thinking and don't realize that that's where their experience comes from. And they don't realize that it's very plain and simply covering their greatest resource. That was all from that one first realization. It's here. When I relax my thinking altogether, I don't lose anything of value. I discover what I had been looking for years and years and years. And that changes relationships dramatically. That alone, that it's here and we all have it, but it gets covered up by getting caught up in and involved in and believing our thought content is the one problem, and the one solution is insightfully waking up out of content into the now, where we find new and fresh and aliveness and love and creativity and compassion and all. Sid called that space the ultimate answer for everything human beings are looking for. Right? The ultimate answer. So that was my very first insight, that almost immediately as I listened to the Sid talk, I teared up, and it was like, I can't believe it. I have what I've been looking for all these years, and it's so readily available to people. It's sort of like, why isn't every human being on the rooftop shouting this out to the world? It's easier than you think. Right? That became my new bumper sticker mantra. It's easier than you think it is. Right? Being a loving, alive, compassionate person. Matt, shall I go to the second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Slide, and then we can go wherever you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this was immediately what happened to me before I even got back home with my wife and kids, and how much it changed my understanding of relationships. Another practical insight is Sid would talk about how we live in the world of thought, and that's the only thing that covers our well-being. But he said there's a huge misunderstanding, is that people don't realize that what they're feeling at any moment is always and only being created by the mental activity thinking they're doing in this very moment. And I didn't. I had studied the umpteen psychological theories about feelings and where they come from. And everybody had a different theory. The past, personality, biology, DNA, parenting, personality, other people's circumstance, situations. That was all part of my training. That's part of traditional psychological training, is there are many, 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 many influences on your experience, on your feelings. And Sid says we live in the world of thought from the cradle to the grave. The power of thought continually generates mental activity, and whatever thought is created in the moment, we're going to feel, and it's instantaneous, always one-to-one, always true. It's a fact. It's a psychological fact. It's not a theory. He insisted it was extremely scientific, because it's not scientific to have a theory that isn't supported by all the evidence. That there's exceptions to theories. A principle doesn't have exceptions, right? Okay, so on a practical level, I'm sitting in a room by myself, in a beautiful room, and I start thinking about a meeting that's coming up a week later. And I realize all of a sudden I'm really tense and anxious. And I think it was the first time that I, in the moment, woke up and realized, wait a minute, The meeting isn't even here. I'm in a beautiful place and I'm thinking up incredible anxiety. As there's no other source to this anxiety. Minutes before, if you'd asked me, why are you anxious? I'd say, because I have a meeting coming up and it's really important and there's lots of things going on and it's making me anxious. And I couldn't do that once I started realizing, wait a minute, I'm just feeling what I'm thinking at this moment. And then the evident, obvious question that follows that for most people and my clients is when they start to catch themselves caught in thought that's creating tension, stress, or upset. Mm-hmm. Clients start going, why would I keep thinking this if this is what it's doing to me? I have free will. I can keep thinking if I want, but why would I? It's like when you have your hand on the hot stove and you realize it's burning, you could go, oh, well, I can keep it here if I want, but why would I? So Sid says, this blew me away. If you really see thought that is creating this tension, you'll take your hands off your thinking automatically. He said it'll just automatically bring you back to the now. If you really see it, like if you put your hand on the hot stove, you don't go, what are the 7 steps for removing your hand from a stove? Mm-hmm. What's the technique? What technique would you use? Right? So without technique, I started catching myself all the time. So how is this practical? Well, in terms of relationships, I now was catching myself left and right every day, caught in thought. Mm-hmm. Kwesi helped me get it simple. She just said, oh, we get caught in thought and then we have trouble. And then when we realize it, we stop being caught in thought and it dissipates and goes away. So here I am in relationship with, I think after I started to realize this, 60% less anxiety that I'm bringing into my relationship. From my initial first insight, oh my God, thought creates every feeling I have, including my biggest bugaboo, worry, anxiety, tension, shoulders up. Mm-hmm. People say Dicken's a nice guy, but boy, he worries a lot. Mm. You know, he likes people, but boy, you can see him worried a lot. And I used to go, well, yeah, I got a lot to worry about. I'm an adult. I got responsibilities. I got a lot of work. I got problems. I'm working with people who are suicidal. Of course, I'm anxious. So my family celebrated. I came home from my first training and I didn't feel like I had to sit to try and meditate to at any moment disengage from my thinking and be in a meditative state. That was part of Sid's teaching. Realization of the principles brings you back to a natural meditative state of being present, awake, alive, alert, relaxed. That's a meditative state. Mm-hmm. It's just natural and it's built into everybody. Without realizing it, we're all meditators. People say, oh, I don't meditate. I laugh. Said, oh, meditation is a natural state or default setting rather than something you do in order to get to our natural state. Mm-hmm. So I stopped meditating 4 hours a day and I became more present, more meditative. I stopped working on my dreams because they're just thoughts I'm having at night. And so just like during the day, I can get caught up in my thinking or not. My well-being doesn't have anything to do with that. I stopped doing all my journaling. I stopped doing all my work. I started reading maybe 1 book a week instead of 3 books a week, which was a big improvement. And in other words, I became more present. That was the first thing that happened in my relationships. I was less preoccupied by my own self-talk, thinking, searching, working on myself, thinking. And my family recognized it, and my wife said, it feels like we have you back with us again.
Mm.
I may have told you guys one time I came home and I'm so preoccupied. My kids called me Space Cadet. I was always thinking about something, and I thought to be an adult with responsibilities, that was reasonable and necessary. And my wife came up to me, she's very playful, and she knocked on my forehead one night. She goes, hello, hello, anybody home? Hey, Dicken. Knock, knock. Are you going to come out tonight and play with us? Or are you going to stay in there all night? And I would try to really be present. And I failed miserably because I was still in the old paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And then with this, I began to have more and more moments where I wasn't preoccupied. And what that did also in relationships is I wasn't so quietly serious. I was more openly lighthearted. I got silly. I'd come home and say to the kids, let's play. And it used to be, I'd come home and they'd say to me, let's play. And I'd say, well, I got a lot of work to do. And maybe in an hour I can, and I'd put it off and put it off. And I'd say, I'm so tired. I've been working all day. And pretty soon I'm coming home. I was more present, which means you're less caught up in thinking that weighs on you, which means you have more energy. And I'd say, hey, kids, let's play. And they go, oh, Dad, you don't understand. We've been in school all day. We're tired. We need they're learning the old paradigm by how I was living my life. And here I younged up. And I was like, you can see that in people who have been around the principles, is they have quite an abundance of life energy. They've younged up.
I like that.
That's a good way of looking at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I noticed that for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny because, and I think this is just something that's been occurring to me lately. I think that when I first came to the principles, and I heard that there was so much emphasis put on having insight, so I thought I've got to go around collecting insights like people collect baseball cards. It's like, have you had an insight this week? If you haven't, you're somehow falling short. And it occurs to me that it seems more evident to me now is that it's probably I probably had one major insight, and it's kind of like it's been like this sort of slow release medicine, the gift that keeps on giving, and you start to see more and more around that particular insight. From what you've shared, it seems like you had this one really beautiful insight where you were kind of reacquainted with your essential spiritual nature. Yes. And then you had this other incredible insight around how we create our own experience through thought. And that may be it. It's like it all grows from there.
I couldn't agree more. Sid had two realizations, and I feel like I've had two realizations. And he started saying there's how the mind works, and there's the nature of the mind. And it's important for people to have insight into how the principles via thought create experience. And people need to know the very nature of the essence of the mind, what he called pure thought, pure consciousness, pure mind, that can only be known or intuited or insightfully realized when we drop out of all personal thought, all concepts. So he says he would say this in almost every talk, don't listen to me. You have to go beyond the words, mine and yours. You have to go beyond all concepts. The second book about Sid's early teachings is called Beyond Beliefs. You have to go beyond all your ideas and beliefs. You have to close the laptop, like we tell our teenagers, you've had enough screen time thinking about life. Close the laptop and just for a minute, in a sense, stop thinking. And you look back on the first book written about Sid, he taught not thinking. Because he felt like if people could just see that we can, when and if we want to, disengage from our intellect. That's what he learned from his enlightenment experience, was he could disengage from his intellect and go beyond the influence of all of that. And the experience of that is vast and open. And he said he experienced love like he's never felt before. And then he realized, well, any one of us can disengage from intellect, close the laptop like we tell our kids, get off the screen just for a second, but I'm addicted to ideas and beliefs, and just for a second, and then rest in this space that's always here when we're not caught up in our thinking. Find out about that space. That's what he meant by look within. Find out about that space. Get intimate with that. And the only way you can find out is not by thinking about it, but by dropping into it. So don't be in your ego waiting for insights. Drop into a space where you see the world from within. So you live insightfully rather than chase after, search, try and find. That's ego's self-development project. Live insightfully. You don't have to label it or say. He said, if you have an insight, the biggest problem people have is they think it's in the words, so they hold on to the words. Say, here's my insight. Look at, I'm so proud I have it now. I'm holding on to this idea that I just had. He said, that's the easiest way to kill an insight. He said, if you have an insight, let go of it immediately, let go of the words immediately, and stay with the feeling. And then it'll keep unfolding. It's not in the words. Not in the words. That was a huge part of his teaching, go beyond the words. Everything I'm talking about, you can experience for yourself if you have the courage. He would say things like, take one little step beyond your babbling thought system. Say, just take one little step beyond your precious little ego mind. Just for a moment, just one, he'd say, just 1 second. He said, don't get greedy. I had 4 seconds. Just 1 second of where you just for a moment pay zero attention to what you're thinking and believing. And in that unknown, you'll discover your spiritual nature, and it'll be ordinary. His presence, it feels open, vast, alive, dynamic. And that's the world of new and fresh. You're looking for new and fresh. You're looking for the silence beyond your noisy thought system, right? You're looking for a feeling. He said truth is always, always, always found in the quiet beyond our words and in the feeling that's always there in that space. That's where you'll find everything you're looking for. It took me years of unlearning to gain deeper and deeper trust and faith that that's true in every situation in my relationships. No exception. No exception. I put it to the test, if you will, for a couple of years. It was like every time I didn't feel close to Cozy or was annoyed and bothered and pissed, just for fun, I'd go, okay, let me just wait a second. And usually at first I had to walk out of the room because I was pissed and annoyed and bothered. And not that that doesn't still happen, but I was doing this experiment, if you will, because Sid would say, find out for yourself. Don't take my word for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean by doing the experiment. And I would go in the other room and let go of everything I was thinking intentionally. I'd close the laptop. Free will. I can if I want to, anytime. And I would close it and just, I'd find myself breathing deeper, relaxing without trying, no technique, just resting in the now. And it felt like my thoughts were liberating themselves. They're just sort of melting into this energy, just opening, falling away. And inevitably at some point I would realize I feel more relaxed, more calm. And I would walk back into the other room with my wife and I'd look at her and I swear somebody switched out my wife as I saw a different person, even if she was still in a low mood and complaining and critical, which is her habit. You look cute to me. That's sort of like when I fell in love with her, it didn't matter what she presented. I'd go, oh man, you are so cute. I'd fall back into a love that was unconditional. Mm-hmm. And I had to see, though, if that was always true in every moment, in every situation. So I put it to the test, like I said, and every time I felt tension, stress, or upset, I'd see if the cure was touching. It would say just one step beyond, just touch that space for one instant, and something beautiful must come into your experience of life. And then you would say, but don't take my word for it. Don't believe a thing I'm telling you. You see if that's not how we're designed. You find out. So that helped my learning curve. And that was in the last few years that I got really so motivated and intrigued and inspired to just find out, because Sid would say love is always the answer, and I say, well, that sounds good, I believe it, until I'm not feeling love, and then I don't think it's the answer. I think if my wife changed, I'd be fine. That's gotta be at least one of the answers.
Is it a multiple choice answer?
Can I choose, please?
And that, I think, is so key for relationships, because in the struggle in relationship, it looks like the other person needs to be different for us to be okay.
Oh man, for sure.
Right. And it looks like, well, if only they would do that, then our relationship would be fine. Yeah. And it's what you're saying is that is the misunderstanding. Yes. That doesn't see where experience is coming from and doesn't recognize where well-being is actually residing, which is inside of us, not outside of us.
You know, I started calling it, I mean, this is just me making up shit, but it was fun. I started thinking that, because back in the 70s, we talked a lot about centering, mm-hmm. being centered in the face of life, doing exercises and practices to be centered, and tons of books were written about how to do it. But I started thinking, when I realized I'm caught in thought creating tension, stress, or upset, when I realize that I'm caught in that thinking, there's what feels to me like dropping out of. I talked to Michael Neal about this. We had similar experiences. It felt like dropping out of my thinking and dropping into what I started affectionately calling a community drop-in center. It's open 24/7. It's non-discriminating. It accepts anyone as they are. The door is always open. You're always welcome in that space. Of course, I use the metaphor of coming home in my book, but I like this idea of having a community drop-in center where we meet our one being. And in that drop-in center, it's like a little oasis that's always here in every moment. And it's where we can be renewed in spirit, where we can be uplifted, where we will be guided for free. That when I fall into that space of not knowing, and there's this welcome feeling, always with that is a knowing that's not of the intellect, which is how Sid described wisdom. And it's a knowing that doesn't even have to go through the intellect. It can just move you the way wisdom moves plants toward the sun. It moves. I watch the birds in my bird feeder without making conscious effort and plans. They just know when to eat, when not to eat, when to look around, and when to fly away. Right? I started seeing wisdom as this universal movement of energy that moves life toward thriving when we don't interfere with its natural ability to do that. And boy, has that been the most recent fundamental shift of Angus, like you said, of seeing that one insight deeper, discovering deeper the nature of the mind over and again, creative, aware, and wise, and trusting more that guidance in relationships. So if something doesn't feel right, I've been learning more and more that if I drop into this drop-in center where I don't have a friggin' clue what to say or what to do or how to deal with this person who I'm pretty convinced is driving me crazy, that in this drop-in center, I'm unconditionally loved, welcomed, loved, uplifted. And then I just seem to know. I have more common sense, if you will, on how best I'll walk back in the room and I'll know whether to say something or not. And things will occur to me fresh to say that I hadn't even thought that I would say. Right? And seeing that one deeper and deeper has been phenomenally liberating, even dealing with our new puppy that at times I wanted to kill. Because once again, it ate another remote, or
we have that going on too.
It totally decimated my favorite pair of slippers, or it just, or it would, you'd tell it one thing and it's anybody who's worked with dogs, and I love training dogs, and this dog is the most stubborn, obstinate.
Really?
Tell me
Your
what
doodle is stubborn?
has an oppositional defiant disorder. I'm a psychologist, for God's sake. I know the dog is the problem, is not me. And how humbling to see, oh man, here's another learning curve area of my life, yet another. And I've really, really been learning a lot because of this little being and deepening my understanding. Literally, I mean that. I really feel so thankful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a huge gift that relationships are in our life, whether it's with people, whether it's with animals, that being in relationship helps us wake up to who we are. And some of the ways it helps us wake up is it reveals our blind spots to us. It reveals where we can't see that it's coming from inside of ourselves.
Rohini, that's music. That's beautiful. A lot of people used to say you would never evolve if you're on a desert island by yourself. It's the blessing of relationships that we bump up against our egos most directly and immediately. And it's humbling once you realize that this is an opportunity rather than a curse.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings us back out of our self-righteous upset
Mm-hmm.
into a humility where you go, Jesus, I screwed up and I don't know what I'm doing, but I'd love to see something new. And if we rest in that drop-in center, the blind spots become more and more renewed to us. That certainly happened to me during all the George Floyd ways in which it created an upheaval, especially in white people, of what we weren't seeing in our blind spots. And I remember talking once with Dr. Roger Mills, who is no longer alive, but was a pioneer in bringing this understanding into communities. And he said it reaches the point where life, rather than study and reading and going to webinars, where day-to-day relationships in life itself become your greatest teacher, presenting the most opportunities for you. And that, thank God, we feel tension, stress, and upset. It means we've gotten separate from our spiritual nature, from wisdom, from love that's unconditional. And it's an invitation to drop in or come home. And then we are freely and unconditionally gifted with new and fresh feeling, insight, knowing, guidance.
Yeah.
Powerful.
I love your metaphor about the drop-in centers. Like, if we all know that we can drop in and have that experience, I mean, ultimately, that is the answer, as Sid Banks was saying. Like, that has everything we need within it, within ourselves. And we just forget that it's available to us, or we maybe don't even realize consciously that it's there. But how profound to know that that is always the direction to look in.
Always that's when it starts getting simple, then advice like Sid would give, okay, forget everything you've learned about the principles, go and enjoy yourself. Just throw yourself into the now, enjoy yourself, go on picnics, be with your family, go and enjoy yourself. And when you start not enjoying yourself, if you know it has something to do with thought, it'll bring you right back to the now. It'll bring you right back to this drop-in center. It'll refresh your page. It will rewild you in the best sense of the term, and you'll become natural rather than artificial. You'll become real again. You'll be a real, ordinary, down-to-earth person.
Yes.
I like the idea of the drop-in center comes with this free gift of a sort of spiritual navigational system.
Yeah.
That piece of equipment that we then get to see, if this really works in the realm of relationship, whatever that is, that's when we get to really see, oh, does this shit work?
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Does it? Come on. And I hope people will all have that burning desire to, I'm not going to take your word for it. I want to find out for myself.
Yeah.
Oh, that's huge, where we begin to take responsibility for finding out if what people have been saying is true and not a theory. If it is true,
yeah,
it's always true. If it's true for every human being.
Yeah. The person who produces the podcast and does the music for us, we had a conversation with him, and he said that this is no longer the time for self-help, it's the time for self-discovery.
You know, it's very beautiful. And sometimes even discovery can become a goal.
That's true, yeah.
So it was interesting to me to hear Sid say, I didn't discover the principles. I dropped into this space and they were revealed to me.
Yeah.
And there's something that is really powerful.
Yeah.
When I work with clients, I now have confidence that if they touch this space, something will get revealed to them, even if they don't know what they've discovered. At some point, they might go, "Oh, look what I discovered." But even before that stage, they'll realize something will become real through them in terms of feeling and guidance that's not of the intellect. So,
Yeah. That's why when it's not of the intellect, it does feel kind of magical in how things unfold, because the intellect can't quite figure it out. Like if I were to look at my relationship with you, Angus, and sort of how it all unfolded, it's like the intellect can't quite grasp how I have a realization that says, "Oh, I can't lose my well-being. It's inside of me. Angus can't take that away from me, even if he's in an, expressing anger toward me. That doesn't take that away from me. It's there." And that clarity shifted. Like, how does that shift a relationship? But it did. I mean, that was enough. And obviously, Angus, you've had your realizations that you've had for yourself, but that one thing changed everything.
I love that notion. Shifts happen. One time at the conference in London, I said I want to get a bumper sticker that says "Shifts happen," and wouldn't you know, I go off for another few weeks of doing trainings, and I ended my training by doing a free training at Rabbi Scholl's place in London, and he's late. And I'd been teaching, and I take a break, and all of a sudden he walks in the back of the room, and he's got the biggest smile on his face, and he's carrying something like this, and he walks up, and it's all tied in beautiful bow, and I untie it, and it's the bumper stickers. Because that's what it was, a sudden shift. It's almost easier to think of it as we're built to have shifts. And that when we begin to touch more and more of that space, that go to the drop-in center, it's inevitable that at some point a shift will happen. We're made to evolve in consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's very hopeful. You're built to have shifts.
Yeah, it is so hopeful.
We're all a bit shifty.
It's very shifty. And it's a lot more hopeful than just, "Oh, bummer, the world's a mess and shit happens."
Yeah.
At least there's some hope in this.
Yeah, it's very hopeful. Well, Dicken, in terms of just that simplicity, I think it really underscores what the rewilding is all about, that it is coming back to that natural state in the way that you're saying it, and it's not difficult. It isn't about hard work. It's simply about being willing to go to the drop-in center. Are we going to allow ourselves to spend some time there? And that it feels good. We're not suggesting people are going to be spending time doing something that isn't first and foremost good for themselves, and going to allow them to have more of a beautiful feeling inside of themselves. And we're just saying to start there and then see what unfolds from there in terms of any changes in life.
I love it too, because it honors the physical. It honors our humanity. It says when we get in our intellects, there's enormous benefits when we use that wisely, and all of us at times will use it unwisely. And then thank God there's tension, stress, and upset to remind us we're trying to use our intellect for something it wasn't built for, and it helps us drop out of that limitation and stuck point and bad feeling. And it can free us then to something deeper. And so he says we get really good at going back and forth between the two worlds, because I love thinking in duality and concepts when it's helpful and it's fun to use the intellect, and until it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so he said, then there begins to be this natural balance between intellect and wisdom. It's not disparaging the human, the intellect, not judging it, not calling it bad. It's having balance. And when people have balance between intellect and wisdom, then the intellect is guided more and more by wisdom. So that's what Sid meant by using the gift of thought wisely,
Mm-hmm.
the intellect wisely. I can't figure out how to do that, but wisdom knows how to use my intellect more and more wisely. It'll tell me when it's helpful to make plans or lists or play around with an idea or a concept, and it'll tell me and guide me, but it also, by the feeling, immediately lets me know when it's time to come back home, come back to the drop-in center, get rebalanced. So in rewilding, I see it's finding our natural balance between human and being, which also then celebrates our bodies and our sexuality and our, we get freed of concepts that limit us to male and female roles, so that we can be Robertini and Agnes.
Our alter ego.
I've been waiting. I'm pathetic. I've been waiting the whole time to try and slip that into the conversation. I just was cracking myself up before we got started of thinking of Robertini and Agnes.
We could be Rogus.
I can't wait to do that. Yeah. We've gone Rogus.
Rogus, yeah, we've got Rogus. That's right.
Of my gender rigidity.
Rewilding. It's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It is. It's all stepping into that formless space where there are, it's that beautiful Rumi poem, step out beyond the right and wrongdoing into that field. It's like, let's spend time there in that open space without the concepts of who we are and how we should be, and resource ourselves and see who we come back as and what gets reformulated along the way. It might be Rogus.
I love it.
We better find that community center and figure it out. Get our reassignment.
Thank God it's open 24/7. It gets really confusing.
Well, Dicken, thank you so much. Did you have another question, Angus?
No, I feel so full. I feel like this has been so rich.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
I love you guys. I love what you're doing. I love how you teach. I love how you're getting to things that a lot of people are not getting to, and they're important to understand in the context of what we're talking about. I love your notion of rewilding. I really do. I've become more and more of a diehard environmentalist as I deepen my understanding. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you,
we love
Dicken.
you too, Dicken.
Yeah.
So grateful, and just want to send you off with lots of love.